Hello dear listeners, welcome to another spine-chilling episode of Exception of Horror. If you are new here, please subscribe the channel for real horror stories, and don't forget the like and comment. This happened back in 2015 when I was much younger and quite naive. It was the only time I ever used a dating app. Being single, I decided to give one a try. I don't even recall which one it was, but I matched with a guy pretty quickly. We started talking, and based on his picture and the start of our conversation, things seemed to be going well. The guy's name was Derek, and he appeared to be tall, strong, and had blondish hair. We chatted about basic stuff, getting to know each other a little bit. After about a day and a half of conversation, he asked me to hang out. I thought this was maybe a bit soon, but I was kind of bored and didn't really have anything going on. I felt like being spontaneous and doing something exciting, though looking back I realized I was just immature and dumb. But I thought why not, and said yes. Derek then suggested that I come over to his place that same day. This is when I got a slight feeling that it might be a bad idea. Even back then, I knew it was probably smart to meet somebody for the first time in a public location. However, I felt confident that I knew him, even though we hadn't sent any pictures back and forth or called each other on the phone. I agreed, and he sent me his address, telling me to come over soon. He said that he was bored and not doing much, and that we could watch a movie and order pizza or something. I told him that sounded good, but that I was only going to stay for a couple of hours at most. It was probably around 7 or 8 p.m. at this point, but I got ready, copied his address, and pasted it into Google Maps for directions. The location was about 10 minutes away across town. His address was typical numbers, a street name, and a zip code. I followed the directions, which led me to a quiet-looking street that was pretty dark. I was told to turn right, and I did, but I was very confused. I was turning into the parking lot of a small, run-down-looking motel. Instantly, I was both angry and scared. Why was Derek telling me to meet him at a creepy motel? He told me I was going to his place. I wanted to just turn around and leave, and I should have. Instead, I pulled into one of the parking lot spaces facing the motel. There were 2 floors of the motel, probably about 20 rooms in total, roughly 10 on each level. The parking lot was basically one long row of spaces facing the motel rooms with a sidewalk in between. There were about 5 other cars in the parking lot, so not many people were staying there. After parking my car, I looked at the rooms and saw that lights appeared to be on in a few, but not many. There were also curtains covering just about every window. I stayed in my car, took out my phone, and texted Derek on the dating app, saying, "You didn't tell me you were at a motel." He apologized and claimed he didn't want to scare me off, but really wanted to see me. He said he was only staying at the motel for a couple of days until he could start the lease on his new apartment. He also mentioned that all his stuff was in a nearby storage unit, and his last apartment lease ended sooner than he thought it would. It was a complicated mess of texts, but I understood his basic point. He was just staying there while he moved from one apartment to another. I sort of believed him because he had been so nice up to that point, although that was probably foolish of me. I told him that I was a bit creeped out and that the motel seemed really sketchy. He acknowledged this, but explained it was all he could afford given the situation with his rent and the deposit on his upcoming apartment. He then asked me to please come inside and told me the number of his motel room. I looked around and saw that it was one of the few rooms with lights on, and it was on the ground level a little ways to my left. I sat in my car thinking about it for a minute. I told myself that the fear I had was more than likely nothing. It was natural to feel creeped out by an old motel like this. I didn't reply to Derek, but after I sat in my car thinking about it, I decided to go in. The story he gave me seemed believable. I opened my door and stepped out. When I shut my door and began to walk, something caught my eye from a motel window. I looked over and saw a guy looking out of the window of Derek's motel room, but it wasn't Derek. After less than a second, whoever this guy was quickly ducked down and covered the window back up with the curtain. Even though I saw him very briefly, I knew for a fact that it wasn't Derek. He looked absolutely nothing like the picture. I assumed that somebody was there with him. I stopped where I was and got my phone. I texted Derek asking, "Who's inside the room with you?" He responded quickly saying, "Nobody, I'm here by myself." The bad feeling I had got worse, and I knew that I needed to leave. I quickly walked back to my car and got inside. I told Derek that I saw someone in his window who wasn't him. He responded with something like, "No, you didn't? Come on in?" At that moment, I had already decided I was going to leave. I got back in my car and drove away. Once I was home, I blocked Derek. Looking back, I realize how lucky I was not to enter that motel. I also realize how foolish I was. I'm glad I learned from that experience. To this day, I don't know if it was a catfish situation where someone was pretending to be Derek, or if he simply had someone else in the room with him. Either way, it was my worst experience using a dating app. A few months ago, I had a harrowing experience that left me shaken and questioning my trust in online dating. At the time, I was 28 and had recently matched with a woman named Lisa on a dating app. We hit it off through our messages and seemed to have a lot in common. One evening, she invited me to a hangout at her place, describing it as a small get-together with some friends and assuring me it would be a casual, relaxed evening. Intrigued, I agreed. Lisa's place was in a secluded area, which initially struck me as odd, but I brushed it off as a quirk of her personality. When I arrived, the atmosphere felt off, though I couldn't pinpoint why. There were a few cars parked outside that didn't seem to belong to her. Lisa greeted me with a warm smile, but there was something unsettling about her demeanor. But inside, the apartment was dimly lit, and a few people were milling about. Lisa introduced me to her friends, a group of 5 or 6 people, each giving me a lukewarm handshake or nod. The conversation was stilted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As the evening went on, Lisa suggested we move to the living room to play some games. I agreed, hoping to ease the tension. Lisa handed me a drink, something she claimed was her specialty. I took a cautious sip, and it tasted odd. I tried to ignore it, but Lisa's friends were huddled together, whispering among themselves, which only heightened my unease. After a while, Lisa and her friends started to act increasingly strange. They seemed overly attentive and insisted that I drink more. Mark, one of Lisa's friends who had been unusually quiet, kept eyeing me with an unsettling look. He continuously offered me refills and pushed snacks that made me feel lightheaded. As the night went on, I began to feel disoriented and weak. Something felt off, and I couldn't shake the suspicion that the drink I was given had been tampered with. My attempts to excuse myself were met with resistance. Lisa and her friends insisted that I stay and enjoy myself. I knew I had to leave, but I could barely stand. Just then, I received a call from my friend Alex. He had known I was going to Lisa's place and had been trying to reach me all evening. His voice was frantic as he asked if I was okay. I told him I wasn't feeling well and felt unsafe. Alex's concern intensified as he began to describe what he had discovered. Using a shared safety app, Alex noticed that I was in a less populated area and started looking into Lisa's background. He uncovered that Lisa had a history of suspicious activity and that her friends had been involved in similar issues. Alex had mentioned that there were reports of similar setups where victims were drugged and abducted. As Alex shared this, I felt a surge of panic. It dawned on me that Lisa and her friends might be planning something sinister. My vision began to blur, and I struggled to stay conscious. Alex urged me to find a way to leave immediately, but I could barely respond. Suddenly, I heard a commotion in the background. Lisa and her friends were arguing, and I could sense their anger through the phone. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. Alex's voice grew more frantic as he tried to keep me on the line and guide me out. The call ended abruptly, leaving me in a haze. I looked around the room, trying to make sense of the blurry shapes and shadows. Lisa approached with a forced smile, and I saw her friends closing in. Their intentions were clear. Now I had to act quickly. Summoning all my strength, I staggered toward the door, but Lisa's friend Mark blocked my path. I tried to push past him, but he grabbed my arm firmly. As I struggled, Lisa's voice commanded me to stay. I felt myself losing consciousness, my vision fading to black. The next thing I knew, I was waking up groggily in my own bed the following morning, with Alex by my side.